Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. Let's talk boxing. Happy New Year. I hope you guys have a very prosperous, healthy, and joyous 2024 where all your dreams come true. Unless, of course, those dreams contrast my own. So if you guys have got yourself a favorite sports team and it's going to come up across my favorite sports team, well, then obviously I wish you nothing but misery, tears, and disappointment. But that's a whole other story, a very niche aspect of life. In all other areas, I'm hoping you have a joyous 2024. I also want to wish Letitia the very, very best. She's a long-time subscriber, a friend of the show. She watches every video, comments on every single video, and she put a comment out on one of the videos, so I'm not sort of revealing anything secretive here, to say that she was about to go in for some surgery. So I wish you the very best, Letitia. I can't wait till you're back to being fighting fit and ready to put me in my place and correct me about all things boxing. So I'm wishing you the best, Letitia. Let's talk boxing, and we're going to hark back to 2023 for this particular video and talk about KO of the year. Now, rather than just list the top KOs and say, I picked this one, like a lot of other channels do, I actually want your feedback. I want to know your criteria. What is it that makes you determine what the KO of the year is? I'm sure you look at a whole bunch of different criteria, but what's the number one? I put out a poll on Twitter. It's got 166 votes so far, where I identified the three most common criteria that I happen to come across personally, just anecdotally speaking. And the first one is the effect on the opponent. One of the things people often talk about is the brutality of the knockout. You know, the way his head or neck just seemed to whip back, the way he hit the canvas, he was unconscious before he hit the floor, how long he was down for, you know, the brutality of it. Another criteria is how skilled the execution was, or rather the level of skill required in order to deliver and execute the knockout. That's what I lean towards. Now, that probably doesn't surprise you guys considering how technical we like to get on this channel, but that's where I go. I tend to feel like I'm in the minority though whenever I say that. And you'll see what I mean when I talk about a KO that I really loved this year that wasn't spectacular in terms of aesthetics, and a lot of people aren't going to pick it anywhere near top of their list. The third one is the shock factor. You know that thing where you're sitting there watching a fight and you're focused on the fight and you know, it's technical perhaps, or one guy's beating down the other guy, and then all of a sudden a shot lands that changes the course of the fight. Oh my word, what just happened? You jump off of your feet, off your chair, you're on your feet. What did I just see? That shock factor can also cause that KO of the year type of feeling. And at the moment, this is what the results are saying after 166 votes, 29.5%, the lowest, say effect on the opponent. I'm surprised by that. Usually, anecdotally speaking, it always seems to be people go, wow, what a knockout, about something that seemed brutal. In second place is where my vote would go. 34.9% feel that it's the skill of the execution that's required. And at top spot, narrowly at the moment, is the shock factor. And I can understand all three of these. Now, some people have also mentioned quality of opponent matters. Of course it does. But to me, quality of opponent is more of a tiebreaker. Let's use Tyson Fury as an example, right? He knocked out Dillian Whyte and Deontay Wilder last year. In the third Wilder fight, very good hooks, you know, technically executed very well, took Deontay Wilder out. But it was part of the expectation. You saw that Wilder was weakening. He was getting beaten up. You knew it was coming. So the shock factor wasn't there. The effect on the opponent was there. It was, you know, he was down for a long time. But again, he'd been weakened by that point. And in terms of the skill of the execution, whilst they were good technical hooks, there was nothing special. You didn't see anything there where you went, wow, you know, how did he execute that? On the other hand, you've got the Dillian Whyte knockout. Now, Whyte, he's walked him onto an uppercut. He's been looking for that shot, but he's walked him onto it. He hadn't been purposely using it, waiting for Whyte to walk into range, and then bang, he lands it. Whyte is really hurt when he's still standing up, catches a little nudge as well, goes down like a tree that's just been cut down. Aesthetically, it's spectacular. The shock factor, it came out of the blue. It's just a better knockout to look at than the Wilder one. But Wilder's has a lot more historical significance. You still go towards Dillian Whyte as a better knockout, right? So it's not just the concept of who the better opponent is. Generally speaking, it goes beyond just who the bigger name is, I think, when you're judging knockout of the year. So let me know which of those criteria you lean towards. First and foremost, let me explain why I go towards skill of execution. Let's use another sport as an analogy. Let's use football, soccer for the Americans out there. If I was to ask you what constitutes the best possible goal, is it really going to be the type of goal where you talk about striking the ball from 30 yards powerfully and putting it in the top corner? You know the ones I'm talking about, a screamer, a worldie as they're known. Don't you get that at all sorts of lower league levels because it's easier to execute than something that requires a supreme level of technical execution? Even as low as non-league, you can get those sorts of strikes. Now, don't get me wrong. They're very impressive goals. You still need the powerful legs. You still need the correct technique to pull it off and so on and so forth. But it's not something that's unheard of when it comes to those levels. What you don't tend to see at that level are those beautiful, technically executed deft touches. the perfectly timed acrobatic volleys, the outside of the boot deft touches, the things that make you go, wow, what on earth did he just do? You know, how did he do that? That's what impresses me. In other words, even if you're at a low level, there are guys that can produce an awful lot of power. They can hit a heavy bag and they'll produce as much power as a big puncher who's a world level guy, and yet he's a club fighter. Whereas take what Alexander Povetkin did to Dillian Whyte last year, for instance. The reason I had that above Tank Davis knocking out Santa Cruz is because with Santa Cruz, he landed a couple of backhands on Tank Davis. Tank was just walking through them. He was essentially using his will to get close. And then he whipped off this despicable uppercut. It was a beautiful shot to see. And the speed of it and the effect it had on Leo Santa Cruz, it was certainly brutal. The shock factor was there. You didn't really see it coming in that moment. Santa Cruz was more than competitive. But the setup was pretty basic. And he got caught a couple of times. Whereas with Povetkin, not only was the shock factor there, because it was against the run of play, you didn't expect it to come like that. Not only was the effect on the opponent brutal, but the setup was superb. He probed moments before, and you saw that Dillian Whyte's hands came together to try and cut off the trajectory through the center line. So then what he did is use the throwaway shot and then step off to the side to create a new angle to be able to throw the uppercut from underneath. Very short lead uppercut, perfect consummate execution. It was just beautiful to behold. It was elite. These are things you don't really see at lower level boxing. It's not like a big haymaker or a 30-yard shot that hits the top corner in football, whereby even if you're of a lower level, you can have your moments where you do something spectacular. This was different. This was elite. And so as a result of that, let's start off one of my favorite knockouts of the year. And that is Jaron Boots Ennis. Back in July of 2023, Jaron Boots Ennis dispatched of the Colombians when it comes to the knockout of the year. But let me talk you through the technical elements of this and why I love it so much. So first and foremost, you see that he shoots a backhand from the shoulder. There's no real overload to it, and the full extension comes to shoot it completely straight. Very, very nice, technical, accurate backhand. But from this position here, the go-to for most fighters when they've got a guy in trouble is to instantly throw a big right hook. Jaron Boots Ennis is actually patient. He waits for Villa to recover his position. And from here, as Villa starts to rise up, he's not going to throw a traditional right hook. If he does, because Villa's recovering his right hands and he starts to bring them up, there's a real possibility that the hook will either land on the glove, the wrist, or as he tries to get around the guard to land around the back of the ear, the forearm and wrist of Villa will partially block it by landing on the forearm of Boots Ennis, and he won't be able to get the full effect of the shot in. So what does he do? Instead of throwing the hook from the shoulder, instead of loading up from that front foot to shoot it with the full trajectory of the hook, the rotation, he shortens the shot by throwing it from the elbow. And that enables him to come inside the arc of the lead hand of Villa. So rather than a hook, it's a hook, but it's coming through the center line. And as he does that, in order to generate the leverage, it's almost like a slap. He whips it. Look at the way his hand ends up coming in towards his own chest. It's a whipping short hook. And that produces power because he shifts his weight from his lead leg onto his back leg. I want to show you it from this angle. So he's landed the left hand. Now from this position here, you can see that his weight is shifted onto his lead leg. He could throw a shovel hook from here. He could throw a hook from here, literally by just pushing off of that front leg, throwing the hook from a trajectory of 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. But instead, because of the reasons we've already spoken about, he readjusts. I want you to look at his back foot. He takes a little step there, a little back step there after he initially planted his foot, which enabled him to shift his weight from that front foot to the back foot. See how he's almost jumping back? Look at his weight distribution. He's almost jumping back, and it's that movement of him moving backwards that is creating the leverage for the power of the shot. It's almost as though he's digging. Think about an undertaker digging into the ground, and he's about to throw the mud from the shovel over the top of his own shoulder. That's the trajectory of what he's done, which coincidentally sets him up for the backhand, because he's now also not only generated more power with that way of shifting his weight, he's also shifted onto the back foot, ready to throw that backhand. He just falls a little bit short because Villa's already on his way down. I love that knockout. Now, anecdotally speaking, perhaps the most popular knockout of all that I've seen online, at least with people commenting on, is Junto Nakatani's knockout of Andrew Maloney in the 12th round. Top Rank also ranked this as their #1 knockout of the year on their own website. Personally, I'm not quite as enthusiastic as everybody else, but I do understand why people are so enthused about this. First and foremost, it is the brutality aspect of it. You see the way Maloney goes down there. It's like a sack of potatoes. The reason I'm not as enthusiastic is because to me, there's no real setup. You see that this is the 12th round, 20 seconds to go. Maloney is well behind on the scorecards. He's been struggling with the range. So he's having to take a risk and walk Nakatani down. And he's coming in behind that high guard where he's almost blinded himself. The reason that that is significant is because, in my opinion, this is a little bit telegraphed. You can see it better from this angle. The fact that he's blinding himself. So as Nakatani has come here in the crouch, it's obvious what he's going to do. He was using that paw-like jab, as you could see here, just as a rangefinder, and then decides to dip down. It's obvious he's about to throw the over-the-top shot, but because Maloney can't see it because of that guard, he sees Nakatani go down. He tries to then time him, but instead he's the one that gets timed with a big shot. So to me, I understand why people like this. Personally, it's not something I'm going to rank highly just because the skill factor isn't really there. It's quite basic. But it also does have that one-punch knockout shock factor, I guess you could say. So it does cover a few bases, just not the skill element, which for me is so important. Let me know what you think about that. Another nominee for knockout of the year is Luis Alberto Lopez, stopping Mick Conlan in the 5th round. And this actually ticks all 3 of the boxes we've spoken about. It's brutal with a real effect on Mick Conlan, who falls on his back flat and is hurt. In addition to that, it's a one-punch knockout, so it can get you off your feet. There's the shock factor involved in that given moment. And there's also a lot of skill involved in reading the patterns of Mick Conlan. Perhaps what deducts from it, though, is that in the build-up, much like Tank Davis with Leo Santa Cruz, he gets caught with a couple of shots. He goes to step in there and he's caught with a little left hook. And then after that, he throws his own right hook and gets caught with a big right hook from Mick Conlan. So his defense isn't great leading up to the knockout. Then he's caught with a little uppercut into the pit of the stomach and he replies with a little left hook of his own. Then, though, comes the skill element where the knockout comes into play. Mick Conlan has a habit of having quite a wide stance, planting his feet and bending at the hips consistently. He doesn't need to be doing this all the time because he has got mobility and good feet. But for whatever reason, he chooses to fight this way and it provides opponents with a pattern and they can capitalize on it. And Luis Alberto Lopez does exactly that. He throws that wide left hook in a bid to set up that big right uppercut, which puts Mick Conlan to sleep. You see that? It's almost like a throwaway left hook. So it scores highly on 3 of the criteria, but perhaps the defensive aspects in the build-up to it deduct from it somewhat. Another superb and brutal knockout was that of Brian Mendoza on Sebastian Fundora. Fundora looks like a bit of a freak show being such a tall, light middleweight, but he can actually fight. And a lot of people were surprised that Mendoza getting the knockout here. And I want to show you how intelligently he worked this. It's orthodox versus southpaw. And you can see that the orthodox fighter in Mendoza jabs at the lead hand of Fundora in the first engagement. There are 2 engagements here in quick succession. He then throws a little backhand to the solar plexus and then a right hand over the top. The first 2 shots there are almost throwaway shots. They're just designed to engage Fundora's high guard so that he's not providing a pattern. It makes Fundora more tentative about letting his hands go if he doesn't know where the shots are going to come from. Then when they disengage, you see that he pats down on the lead hand of Sebastian Fundora and then he waits. Here, he waits for Fundora to throw a jab, and instead of stepping on the outside, you often hear people say, you want to get that outside position when it's orthodox versus southpaw, and I explain, whilst that is generally a rule and something you learn early on, as you begin to develop as a fighter, you start to know when you can break those rules to your advantage, and this is an example of Mendoza doing that. He waits for that lazy jab to come in from Fundora. We know that he's very backhand happy. He likes to shoot that backhand uppercut, and he uses the shoulder of Fundora and the lead hand to hide his own intentions here, his own left hook. He steps inside the foot and throws that left hook. He lands flush. Now at this point, he's perhaps expecting that backhand uppercut to come back at him. So he quickly seeks to step out. Once he realizes that Fundora's hurt, he throws the right hand, left hook, lands them both. So he's even accurate when he's going for the finish. It's a terrific knockout for Brian Mendoza. Another knockout that scores highly on the brutality factor and the shock factor, and it's gone under the radar, which is unusual considering it involves Anthony Joshua, is that one over Robert Helenius. And the impressive thing is here that Robert Helenius actually rolling back as the shot is being delivered and the power still carries. So it's obviously a very brutal delivery of power from Anthony Joshua. In terms of skill, he does something that he is pretty accustomed to doing as part of AJ's game. He likes to target the body quite consistently. And then when you're more focused on the body, he tends to then try and switch it up and go upstairs. This is something that is, of course, pretty common with punchers. They look to this particular combination. I'll show you in a moment that Inoue used this against Stephen Fulton too. do. But the way in which AJ went about it is to initially jab the right hand of Robert Helenius, who's caught a little bit square on. Then he decides to come low to shoot that jab into the solar plexus. And he actually gets caught with a jab there, but it's clipped because he's pulled on the outside of the center line. If he didn't do that and he just dropped low to shoot the jab in the center line, he would have got caught with a jab on the top of the forehead. It would have snapped his head back, which would have affected his equilibrium. It would have affected his construct, which would have meant that it's unlikely he would have produced the right hand with the same ferocity. But because he only got clipped with it, his feet were still able to come close enough to Helenius and therefore be able to really load up on that right hand and catch him. And here's the example of Naoya Inoue using a similar combination against Stephen Fulton. Jab to the body, quick right hand upstairs, and then he follows up with a left hook. That didn't actually stop Fulton. Fulton ended up essentially surviving, getting up for a few seconds later, getting stopped as he was in the turnbuckle, but the methodology was similar. Brilliant knockout from Anthony Joshua. Now, this particular knockout from Samuel Antwi on Mason Cartwright scores highly on all the criteria. It's brutal. There's the shock factor of the way it came in what was a terrific affair, and there's a lot of skill involved. The only reason someone might keep this off top spot is that it was for the vacant British super welterweight title. And as a result of that, some people will say, well, Mason Cartwright isn't exactly an elite level fighter. But if you look beyond that and you're just looking at the KO itself, this was incredible stuff. You see them come together here and he just lifts his arm up, and as you can see here, he's got the elbow up. He's just feeling Cartwright. He's waiting to see what he's going to do. The minute he feels that movement, he rolls behind the shoulder, brings that front leg out to create an angle, loads up with the right hand, lands it on Cartwright. And at this point, Cartwright is essentially unconscious on his feet. And I want to play it for you at full speed just so you can see the brutality of this. There he is unconscious on his feet, comes a whipping left hook, and then a right hand to follow up as well. And he even drops a woo in there after he lands that right hand. The referee can't actually get close enough, quickly enough, partly because Cartwright has his back to him, as you can see here, when the actual shot lands. So I don't think he's aware of the effect it had. And by the time he covers the distance, you can see the effect it had. You even see, like I said, that little woo shout. Look at the mouth here of Antwi as he lands it there. Woo! He's celebrating while his opponent is already essentially unconscious on his feet. Of all the knockouts we've considered, perhaps the one that ticks all the boxes most effectively, and on top of that, ticks the box for the tiebreaker, is Zhilei Zhang stopping Joe Joyce in 3 rounds. You've got your one-punch knockout. In addition to that, it's a brutal shot, and you see a very big man fall to the canvas heavily. There's a lot of skill involved, and we'll talk about how he went about setting up that skill. And if you're talking about tiebreakers, well, it was against a world-level heavyweight who had previously been considered to have somewhat of an indestructible chin. So let's talk a little bit about how Zhilei Zhang went about this. He throws a throwaway jab, then a follow-up, then a left hand to the body, and he follows that up with a right hook upstairs. Now, one of the things that goes under the radar here is that when he actually throws that backhand before going upstairs, he actually targets Joe Joyce's backhand there. That is to freeze him up. That is to enable him to buy himself time that before that backhand comes back at him, he can land the right hand first. You see that? If Zhilei Zhang was to throw to the chin or even to the resting arm here, which is protecting the body, Joe Joyce could potentially fire that hand back quicker than Zhang gets off his right hand. But because he's engaged that hand, Zhang's already starting to shoot that right hand. By the time Joe Joyce then sets off with his own punch, it's Zhang that lands first. And just to show you how significant it was that Zhilei Zhang targeted the backhand of Joe Joyce in that position, I want you to look at their foot positioning, because it's actually Joe Joyce that tries to get the outside angle in terms of the foot positioning. So as it plays along, as Zhang's about to throw that backhand, you can see it there. Joyce is hiding behind the shoulder. He's pretty safe here. The trajectory to the face is pretty cut off, and his lead foot's already coming off the floor. Joyce is planning on that step there. You see how he's taking the outside angle? And there comes the right hand. So once he's got his foot on the outside of Zhang's, he's the one who's in position to land that backhand down the pipe. He's the one in an advantageous position here. But because of that slight moment of delay where the backhand's been knocked away and has to come back, and Zhang's acutely aware of that, and he looks to step out with that right hook, bringing his head off the line as well. Look at where his head is here, and look at where it ends up. See how he moves off the line? He's able to land his own right hook first, getting his head off the line, buying the time to be able to do all of that because he targeted the backhand. It was a brutal knockout that brought about high-level skill in order to achieve it. Let me know what made your list. So my gold medal, of course, goes to Zhilei Zhang. It covered all 3 of the criteria, ticked all those boxes, as well as the fact that it was against a fighter with an iron jaw. I've also got to give a little special shout out from a personal perspective to Jerome Boots Ennis, because whilst it may have lacked the spectacular aesthetics of some of the other knockouts, I loved the methodology of how he went about his work. Let me know in the comment section down below what your favorite knockout of the year was and why. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to hit a stiff jab on the like button, a right cross on the subscribe button, and an uppercut on the notifications button. Thanks for watching. Chat to you soon. Take care. God bless.